I don't really enjoy asking people to like and subscribe, but it is very clear that it helps out the channel. So if you get to the end of this video and you found some enjoyment out of it, perhaps you'll remember this message. A few weeks ago, Envy Ranger & Co. was contracted to map out the railroad system in the New Vegas region, and to my surprise, it was in a pretty decent state with a logical setup. The tracks passed by a multitude of stations, train yards, a couple of quarries, a cement mixing plant, a rock crushing plant, and an airport. The list goes on. Feel free to go check out our mapping and report of those tracks, but today my employer has turned my focus towards the capital Wasteland and what their tracks have to offer. We're going to focus on the high-speed monorail system that stretches across the map. This is such an interesting set piece of Fallout 3's world, and I say that because there's nothing the player can really do with this. It's huge, it's enormous, it's something to look at, but that's all it is really. We're going to travel the entire length of this monorail system and map out all of the trains that are still left on it along with the cars that are attached to them, mark their location down, and talk a bit about what we can tell from what remains. But before that, I just want to talk about some smaller general details. First of all, we can see there is a logo that reads CMR that is on the side of the train as well as the passenger cars. It seems that this logo can only be found in Fallout 3 in the DC area, and then once again in Philly in the Fallout TV show, but this is not Philly as in Philadelphia. This is just a town somewhere in the California area, maybe around Los Angeles. It doesn't seem that we have anything concrete as to what CMR stands for. My only guesses would be that it's the Commonwealth Monorail or the Columbia Monorail. Now, if it's the Columbia Monorail, that doesn't really make sense as to why we would see their logo all the way in California. Columbia would be referring to the District of Columbia, which is what DC and Washington, DC stands for if you're unfamiliar. To counter that point, CMR is just a company, so just because Columbia is in their name doesn't mean they only can be in the District of Columbia. They may have expanded across the United States. The idea of C in CMR standing for Commonwealth comes from the reality that the pre-war United States was comprised of 13 different commonwealths. This might be a bit confusing because which commonwealth is it referring to, but then again, if this track stretches across all of the United States, then maybe it's just referring to it being the Commonwealth monorail system for all of the commonwealths. This is a great little detail because it doesn't bother explaining itself too much to the player. There's nothing that pops out and says, yes, this is what CMR stands for on the side of the trains. You just have to guess, and it leaves you wondering. This is just an instance of the world presenting itself to you as is and leaving you to wonder about what it might be, which is a great little microcosm of what we could use to explain the entire monorail system on this map. You don't get a whole lot of information about it, almost none. It's just presenting itself to you. This is what's here. This is what this world looks like. It's using an advanced Maglev sort of monorail system, which takes us into the next minor detail. This train doesn't appear to have any moving parts or wheels on it. It's just what I'm assuming is a maglev. Now, I don't know a whole lot about trains, so feel free to get into that further in the comments if you do. The real-life counterpart to this is Amtrak's Acela train system, which runs from the cities of Boston, New Haven, New York City, Philadelphia, Wilmington, and then Washington, DC. This is a high-speed train, and it gets up to about 150 miles per hour, but it's on normal railroad tracks, or at least not on maglev tracks. It's not the same thing, and it doesn't seem to be as expansive as the ones shown in Fallout 3. From what I can tell, the United States does not use maglev trains like we can see in other parts of the world, but there are proposed plans for such systems, such as the Northeast maglev, which would in theory get you from Washington, DC to New York City in just 1 hour. Just for reference, this trip could take you from 4 to over 5 hours in a car, depending on if you're going to avoid toll roads or not, and then you have to factor in traffic as well. We can see that in the pre-war, commuters were using these maglev trains to travel, and if you were under these trains, they would have been zipping by you very fast, well over 200 miles per hour in all likelihood. Unfortunately, now they lie dormant, sitting completely still and largely in disrepair. And as much as I appreciate this detail in the world, something I have to note is that it doesn't seem there are any stations. There's no way to get on or off of these trains. I have traveled the tracks up and down many times at this point, and I can't find anything approximating a station. We'll get more into this later, but when the track goes into the DC area, it sort of just disappears. So I guess we could give Bethesda the benefit of the doubt and assume that there's some station ideally in the central area of town, and we just don't see one because there's no reason for this train to be stopping at the points that we can actually access. If the point of the system is to get you very quickly and very rapidly from one city to another, it wouldn't make sense for it to be stopping out in the middle of nowhere. That would slow things down a lot. So it makes sense that I guess we don't see any entrance points. And that leaves us with this looming inaccessible structure that runs across the map, and it's just something to look at again. It's really not serving any purpose to the player. It fills out space a bit, and it does seem to be very dangerous along the route. I was getting shot at and attacked constantly. And if I could counter myself, I suppose that this does serve a bit of a purpose because it does run near other locations and it gives the player a bit of a reference. If you don't want to be staring at your map constantly, or maybe even if you are, you can look back at the railway and be like, okay, this is where I am. I'm going to stop off. I see a point of interest off in the distance. I'll go over there, check that out, and then I'm going to come back to the railway and follow it. It does act as a bit of a guide across the map in that way, especially in getting you to parts that aren't necessarily relevant to the main story. And that point is sort of compounded by our next focus when we take a look at where the railway actually runs across the capital Wasteland, because it's not in and around the DC area. It's not near Megaton. It really doesn't go too close to many of the sections of the main story of Fallout 3 where you're going to be going to, again, Megaton, Rivet City, the Jefferson Memorial, locations like this. The whole railway is mostly stretched across the northern half of the map. In fact, almost entirely, it doesn't go towards the south. And I say almost because we do have one strange little mystery section of the railroad that isn't attached to any of the rest of it. This section can be found down near the Ranger compound right in downtown DC, and we can see not even the tracks that are within this section of the track are connected properly. It feels like a very unfinished portion. Maybe there's some cut content going on here. Potentially relating to this portion of the track, I think it's important to note that Fallout 3 originally was supposed to include more of the Washington DC urban area, but we don't get that. And when we compare what we can see on Fallout 3's map to what DC looks like in real life, we can see we just sort of have a corner of the DC area, not the full thing. So maybe this track was originally supposed to run through more of what should have been accessible to us. Beyond that, we can see that Fallout 3's monorail system is detailed pretty clearly on the map when we look at the northern section, but this strange, mysterious little detached part doesn't have anything representing it on the map. At least as far as we can tell, this is in that cloudy portion of the DC area of the map. I just find that the cut content and the unexplained parts of Fallout games are often the most interesting. They have a lure to them and this mystique that makes you want more, makes you want to know more, learn about potentially the development, what was originally intended even. So all we can tell is that this portion of the monorail system runs into the carcass that remains of the DC area, where you can see these completely destroyed buildings off in the distance. Now let's go back and take a look at the main monorail system that is actually mapped out. So we'll start up here in the very north, where we can see the monorail system comes down, potentially from Maryland, and maybe this even connects that larger megalopolis, starting from Boston through New York City and Philadelphia, eventually running into where we are here in DC. If that were the case, we would assume that the monorail system would go through Baltimore as well, given Washington and Baltimore are so close, they're sister cities. But when we take a look at the map, things are kind of strange. So let's use Old Olney as a reference point, which is Olney in real life. We can use that to sort of understand the differences between the maps here. Now, the monorail system comes from the west of Olney, on the west side of Olney on the map here, whereas we can see Baltimore is to the east of Olney. So if the monorail track is coming from Baltimore, you would think that it would come from the east of Olney, but in game we can see the tracks come from the west. The reason I bring this up is because Washington is actually the westernmost city out of this northeast megalopolis. As I said, the track runs northwest out of the area, but if you were to take the most streamlined approach to getting from Washington DC to Baltimore, you would go northeast, which would then pair you into once again going northeast up towards Philadelphia. This makes me think that these tracks actually leading north out of the area are going somewhere towards Pennsylvania or just further west, maybe even through Pittsburgh, the Pit. And perhaps as the tracks actually get closer to DC, they're going to turn around and head back northeast towards Baltimore through the rest of the cities, which is slightly confusing because the other set of tracks that enter the capital Wasteland are coming from the northwest as well, but just a lot less north and a good bit more west. So my best guess as to where these two distinct tracks proceed is that the one coming from the north comes down through DC and then spins around back up towards Baltimore, and then the one coming from further west comes down through DC and then heads down south, maybe towards Richmond, Virginia, and proceeds south. Let me know what you think though. This is all just speculation, of course, so have fun with it. What isn't speculation though are the locations of the trains on the tracks that we can find, so let's get into that now. Once again, we're gonna start back up in the north and we're gonna label this first train Train 1, and then we're going to proceed all the way through this track until it ends just passing DC, and then we're gonna work our way back across the western section of the track. Train 1 is coming from the north towards DC, and we're going to say that it's on the left side of the track. We're going to maintain the perspective here that we're riding into the area, into DC. I know if you flip this around and you're driving out of the DC area, you're once again on the left side, but we just need to use this as reference for the one little issue that I found on the tracks. Train 1 is just near the edge of the map, and it's right next to this massive overpass, which is something else that's kind of strange and interesting about the world of Fallout. There are so many giant overpasses, and we can see the monorail system is also lifted up well above the ground. I don't know why they're so afraid of getting close to the ground, but it just seems to be the case for much of the world, especially here in the capital Wasteland. We don't run into Train 2 until we get all the way down near the Germantown police station, and unlike Train 1, this train is completely derailed, so we can't tell exactly which side of the tracks it's on, but I'm going to give Bethesda the benefit of the doubt and assume that it was on what would be the right side tracks. I know technically, again, it would be on its own left facing that direction, and it's headed out of the capital Wasteland. There was a large gap in between Train 1 and Train 2, but Train 3 is just after Train 2, still very close to the Germantown police station. Now, Train 1 was entirely on the tracks from what we could tell. It had one car detached from it. Train 2 was completely derailed, and then Train 3 is entirely on the tracks as well, and this time all of the passenger cars are connected to the main train. Just after Train 3, we can see the tracks come very close together and are riding parallel, and then shortly after that we run into Train 4, which is going to break the trend. This one is neither entirely on the tracks or entirely derailed. We can see one passenger car remains up on the tracks, another passenger car is tipped over, and then the train is completely derailed down on the ground. I want to mention train number 4 is just next to Scrapyard, where you can find dog meat. Now, if we proceed much further to the edge of the map running towards DC, we finally run into Train 5. Now, Train 5 is the problem train. This is a bad train. It is a flaw, perhaps on Bethesda's part. Maybe it's intentional, it's some strange little Easter egg, but more likely it's a bit of a mistake. The reason Train 5 is a mistake is because it's on the wrong side of the tracks. It's going to end up running into a head-on collision. Again, we'll quickly go back and look at what side of the tracks the trains are on when they're coming from the north into the DC area, and this is the same for the ones coming from the west into the DC area. Trains that are coming towards DC are on the left side of the tracks, and if you were riding in that way, you would see trains leaving the area on your right. Train number 5, however, for whatever reason, is placed on the wrong side of the track. So again, this is going to run into a head-on 250 mile/hour plus collision with another train that's leaving the area. In the end, it didn't matter because the Great War happened, the bombs fell, and everything was destroyed, but perhaps this is some sort of sabotage or attack. Maybe some people got this train train on the wrong side of the tracks and we're sending it down? I don't know. I really just think it's probably a mistake, a little oversight, or maybe an Easter egg at best. So we have 5 trains in total on this track, and it seems that each train has 2 passenger cars attached to it. Now, this trend is instantly broken by the first train that we're going to take a look at on the other set of tracks, which seems to only have 1 passenger car. And we can see the train is still up on the tracks, and then that 1 passenger car has fallen down below. I don't know where the other one went. Maybe it was scrapped or taken apart by Wastelanders. This is train number 6, and we'll consider this another odd guy because it only has 1 car attached to it. And I do need to go back and make a quick correction. Train number 2 has 3 cars attached to it, so another odd one out. That's the one that was completely derailed and headed north out of the map. Train number 6 is going to take you by Paradise Falls. Now moving on to train number 7, which isn't too far behind it and moving in the same direction. We can see it has a normal amount of train cars, but only 1 passenger car remains up on the rails. The other 2 are down below. They've actually fallen all the way down into the Potomac River, and this train is sitting right next to the Roosevelt Academy. Train number 8 is headed in the same direction next to the abandoned car fort, and this is another odd one where it only has 1 passenger car attached to it that we can see. And our final train, train number 9, is just near the edge of the map, exiting it away from DC. The train and both of its cars are still on the rails. And then finally, I'll add a little rectangle to represent that mysterious detached section of rail that's deeper in the DC urban region. So when we take a look at our map, obviously there are 9 trains in total. We have 1 train with an extra passenger car, and then 2 trains with 1 less passenger car than what would be the norm. Then we have 7 of the 9 trains headed towards DC rather than away from it. We only have 2 trains headed away from the DC area out of each one that Bethesda placed on the rails. You would think that people would be trying to get away from the DC area because there were wars going on. The Great War is on the horizon where all the bombs are going to be dropped. Not that your average person had a lot of insight into that, but potentially people would be trying to get away from the major urban sprawls of the East Coast and out into the countryside, which wouldn't be targeted as heavily. Maybe Bethesda wasn't thinking that much into it, or maybe there's a different story being told as to why nearly 78% of our trains are headed towards DC instead of out and away from the city. This also has me wondering to what extent these trains were still operating after the bombs fell, because it's pretty clear that none of them were directly hit, at least not in this part of the map. Perhaps for some short period of time, these trains were still whipping around at hundreds of miles per hour with people inside, and they were just watching the destruction happen. I'm not sure if they would still be alive inside of them though. As if seeing nuclear bombs dropped all across your countryside isn't terrifying enough, imagine moving at hundreds of miles per hour while all of that is occurring and not being able to stop, completely out of control, whipping around the country in a train while bombs are dropping left and right. That's a nightmare. Okay, time for me to get back to New Vegas and turn this report into my employer. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the comments.